So we would like to acknowledge that we are located in the unceded territories of indigenous peoples whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. The Mansos, Sumas, the Tiwa, Inde, and the Piros. We would also like to acknowledge with respect the pueblos originarios who have come to this land in more recent times. The New Savi, Raramuri, Ñato, Tzahumni, Nahuatl, and the Virarica. They are joined today by the Chuj and the Acateco people who were displaced from their communities in Central America and now serve as stewards of this transnational space. As academy and community-based knowledge holders who live in the desert, by the river, surrounded by mountains, we respect and honor the millennia-long history of Native peoples on this land and their ongoing presence today. Now, for the presenters, being a wonderful blend of Navajo and Mexican American, Cheyenne Lozano states growing up in the border between two countries, as well as two identities that made her the person she is today. Someone dealing constantly with others' definitions and finding new ways to follow or set definitions. While starting her history degree at UTEP, she worked with Dr. Shepard, the late Dr. Daly, and her close friends from ARISE, the Academic Revival of Indigenous Studies and Education, a student organization whose goals are to educate and bring awareness of indigenous communities, cultural diversity, history, and current events to the El Paso community. She spent her college years helping to bring indigenous voices, music, and perspectives to UTEP. Now, as an aspiring writer, she hopes to add to the growing area of indigenous poets and authors that help break stereotypes and include themselves in a spheres of influence. So thank you, Cheyenne, for being here. And we also have Ryan Francisco, and please let me know if I'm pronouncing names correctly, who is from New Mexico State University in 20 with a bachelor's degree in government, becoming the first family to achieve what his parents, and great grandparents wanted for themselves and himself. He currently for the Workforce Innovation Act program, the northern portion of the state of New governor of Isleta del Sur Pueblo, the Tribal Youth Council, and a culture and language educator for Target Tigua AmeriCorps. As a culture and language educator, Vianney teaches the youth of her community their native language, which is called Tigua. She's in the process of learning it herself and is grateful to be part of an amazing program that allows her to pass on knowledge of her culture and language to the tribal youth. So welcome, Vianney. Thank you very much. And finally, we have Amri Rodriguez, who is a member of the Isleta del Sur Pueblo and a senior at Socorro High School. Amri was crowned 2019 Tigua Pau Wow Princess at the Isleta del Pueblo Rocking the Res Pau Wow. As the Tigua Pau Wow Princess, Amri participated in the first annual Indigenous Peoples Celebration Indigenous Youth Voices panel discussion. Department of Tribal Empowerment Libraries read across Native America. Native Health Initiative, Healing Through Justice Camp, and partner with Miss Indian World Cheyenne Kippenberger in promoting the 2020 U.S. Census. Amri is also an active member of Isleta del Sur Pueblo's Tigua Youth Council, a youth organization in her tribe that promotes community involvement amongst other youth. And when Amri was in 6th grade, she was a participant in the Young Warriors program, where she had the opportunity to visit Arizona State University. Since then, it has been Amri's dream to attend ASU and pursue her bachelor's degree in political science with a minor in American Indian Studies. So welcome, Amri Rodriguez, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, panelists, for being here. We truly appreciate it. And I think we can probably start with the questions. If everybody's ready. All right, so our first question with the panelists is why is student involvement important in educating the community on all Indigenous cultures, histories, and current events? And this is open to everybody. And we can start with maybe Cheyenne first and then work our way around. If you guys want to do that. Oh, AJ needs to present himself too. Okay. So go ahead, AJ.
Introduce myself?
Yes, if you can.
Okay, yeah, awesome. Thank you. Is my audio okay? Can everybody see me? Okay, awesome. So, Datanjo, AJ Garcia Shtish, Angel Garcia Mijish, Kai AJ Garcia Mijil, Lucy Shinashaslet Chiashte. Hello, everyone. My name is AJ Garcia, and my mom's family originates from Dulce, New Mexico, which is the Hickory Apache Reservation. And my father's family comes from southern Mexico and northern Guatemala, about that region. And I am currently attending the University of New Mexico, getting eventually my master's degree in public administration with a focus in public policy and nonprofit. And I am also the chair on the board of directors for the Unity Among Nations Youth Council. So I'm really happy to be with everybody today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, AJ, for joining us. We really appreciate you. So is it okay to start with the questions or?
Yeah, so I have a response. It was about the student involvement. I think, especially on college matters, a lot of, colleges are kind of amazing because you have so many people that are studying and practicing to go into different fields. And when you have these opportunities, these windows for people to learn, to teach others about a topic like Native American or Indigenous studies, I think you're not just helping those individuals, but you're helping whatever career they end up going into. So if a law student happens to walk into a presentation on a Native American issue, they'll go into their careers with that knowledge, and they'll hopefully make a positive impact in their career with that knowledge that they've gained. If you have a student that's going to become a teacher, they're going to move on and teach kindergarten, first grade, all the way to 12th grade, whatever they end up choosing. And if they attended some event, they can make an effort when they're doing their classes, when they're teaching something, when they have that required Thanksgiving coverage in their classes, to add something, to make a difference, to make a change. And even if it's a student that doesn't finish their classes, maybe they have to focus on their family. If they decided and made the effort to learn about Indigenous cultures or these kinds of events and things, it's like they can carry that into how they raise their children, how they talk to people, how they talk to anyone. So I feel like that's why it's important, especially when you're in a university setting where you can get that somewhat more academic, higher learning description on these things, that you should be a part of it, be involved, and the like. Looks like there's some technical difficulties. I might be saying their name wrong, but Rayanne, do you have any comments on that question?
Yes, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, that's an important question, and I feel through my experience going to college and my experience now, it's not so much to necessarily teach people about all the different Native communities, because that's so many across, the entire world, but to focus on your background and on your culture and on your heritage, and to teach those to other people as well, and to teach the things that you've experienced and you've learned from other tribal communities. And it's so important, especially now, to really recognize a lot of Native American issues across across the United States and in our own communities as well. I've always really talked about the issues of tribal communities that I know of the location that I'm at. And in my current job, I always remind myself and I always remind my coworkers as well of a lot of the issues that we experience in our community. And that's really important um, to the conversations about our Indigenous heritage, and ensuring that we counter the negative or not so true, or the misrepresentation of Indigenous peoples, not only in film, but in, literature and in readings. So that's, my answer to the question. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that response, Rayon. AJ, would you like to add to that?
Absolutely, yeah. So definitely to go off of what Rayon said, it is really important that we educate communities on, all of the different Indigenous cultures and identities and histories, right? Because there is this very generalized idea of Indigenous people that, like Rayon said, we see in film, we see in literature, we see in mainstream pop culture, right? It is kind of like this, there's definitely like a certain, collection of different stereotypes, like the noble savage, right? The stoic Indian, or the drunk Indian, right? So there's a lot of different stereotypes that we see in mainstream culture that people kind of generalize all Indigenous peoples as, and also the Plains kind of culture trope, where every Indigenous person is from a Plains tribe, or kind of follows that what you see in movies is like pulls from a lot of like Lakota and Navajo culture, right? So I think it's important for people to understand that not only are Indigenous peoples a lot more diverse than that is showing, is that, but also that we don't just come from what today is the United States. That's kind of a very narrow-minded view to think that all Indigenous people are kind of like the Plains Indians from the United States that are no longer here, and if we are here, we still living in the old days, or we're all drunks, or we're all living on reservations. But we live a very contemporary existence, much to some folks' surprise. So I think it's important to change, to shift that narrative, right? To kind of go at heads with those stereotypes, so that way we can better kind of draw attention to the issues that we are facing in contemporary times. The fight for land, the fight for resources, the fight for water, the fight for different resources on all of our lands, or and so on like that. It's important to kind of break the stereotypes so that way we can draw attention to all of those issues that we're facing. So
Thank you so much, AJ. We appreciate it. Can we move on to Vianney or Amory, whoever is ready to speak?
Hello, can you guys hear me good?
Perfect.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. I just think that it's important because I know in my high school, like they wouldn't talk that much about Indigenous issues, like in history. It would only be maybe like a day we would go over it, and then the next week we'd move on to something else. So I don't know, especially here in El Paso, they didn't really bring up our tribe, the Isla del Sur Pueblo. They kind of just did a generalized topic of just all indigenous people of just North America, and they never talked about the indigenous people of South America. So I just think it's important, especially going on to college, to spread awareness just on indigenous like problems, and like how there's also reservations that don't have running water, and not that many people know about that. Um, it's just a lot of representation um, that isn't involved like in the media. There's no representation for um, indigenous issues and just like education overall. But yeah, that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Can y'all hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Kind of like what VNA went off of, like in El Paso, we're a border town, like, you know, there's different diversity here, like, but I guess, yeah, like kind of like that, like it's important to like get it out there that there is a tribe here, that there are still Native Americans, because I always get the question, you guys still exist? And it's like, yes, we still exist, we're still here. I think it's important getting it out there in the community. There are, I personally feel like there are quite a bit that, I mean, they don't know their own culture. They don't know that there's other tribes out there, or they do know that there's other tribes out there, but they think that we're all the same, and we're not. We all go by different beliefs, different traditions, different, you know, all that. So yeah, basically that, and then like more in the public education system, more on like based on like what BNA said, misrepresentation of indigenous people. I remember in elementary, they'd always ask me if I lived in a teepee when I'd bring it up that I was Native. And I think now that I'm older, I began to get more of an understanding and knowing, or not knowing, but an understanding and the importance of to why we need to educate people. And yeah, that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much. It's really interesting and how, you know, our perspectives and how we deal with student involvement. We do have another question. I don't know if Moi would like to ask it, or I should.
I'm sorry. Yeah, no, yeah, I can ask another question to everybody in the panel. I would like to know, in terms of student involvement, what were some challenges or pushback you faced regarding academic support? Did you get it? How was it? And student recruitment and retention.
Can you repeat the question real quick?
In terms of student involvement, what were some of the challenges or pushbacks that you faced regarding academic support and student recruitment and retainment? And what are the reasons for such challenges and pushback?
I'll start this off. I'd say some of the challenges I've faced throughout my history in academia and higher education, they've been overt, or sometimes you question it. For instance, something I experienced was I would get a scholarship handled through my Navajo Nation, and for years it was like pulling teeth to get it handled by UTEP. It was something I had to struggle with every year to make sure it was processed right. I'm not sure if people really believed me on some of these things. It was always just the hardest fight to deal with. And I know that with scholarships, sometimes these things are complicated, but you know, it took much longer than I think it should have. It wasn't until my final year did UTEP finally seem to get a handle of how to handle my scholarship, and that's really upsetting. And I think if I wasn't the persistent person I was, where I would literally just sit in the financial aid office until they handled me, I wouldn't leave. If I wasn't that person, I mean, that would have just been, you know, something that could have stalled up everything. You know, when I went to UNM and I never had that issue before, but you know, when I was a much less experienced student, those kinds of things really deterred me from fighting, because it's like, well, how do you fight that kind of issue? But I really did make that stance with my scholarship here at UTEP, and I was appreciated. I appreciated that they did handle it, but that was something where, you know, just a moment of their time could have meant them like the world to me at those moments. You know, taking the time to say that they were going to do my best and treat the scholarship just like they treat any other scholarship. And then again, I was part of the group. I started the Arise situation, and there was moments where sometimes it just didn't feel like our events had the support from the university. We would have to really struggle and fight to get some of our events passed. And even though it'd be under the guise of being, oh, well, maybe you didn't file the paperwork right, maybe you didn't do this, like sometimes, like, it didn't feel that way. It very much felt like we were being treated differently than other organizations because of the people's inexperience with us. And I think that's just something that comes out of ignorance on most parts. And I would like to say that by being that person to push it, it leads to being solved later. So, you know, our struggle with club organization stuff, all those early years of me dealing with it, I'm you know, knock on wood, I hope that now it's easier for groups like Arise and other groups to do these things because of that persistence. But that persistence is hard to keep up.
Yes, thank you, Cheyenne. And definitely, I can tell you to that question, what you're saying, definitely everything that you have done has had an impact. And as an organization, we can tell all the work you've done is wonderful, and it's made things very much easier for. So thank you, thank you. Um,
Can you repeat that, Moy?
so just wanted to thank Ian.
Right, so I think we are experiencing some audio and still video on my part difficulties. If Moy, would it be okay if I step in, or do you think you would be able to? All right. Okay, so thank you so much, Cheyenne, for your input. We can actually open up that same question to the other members. So whoever would like to go first, AJ, Armory, Vianney, who would like to go first?
I'm happy to go if that's all right with everybody. You know, I think that it's really important to look at this question also in a larger context, right? Because it's, you know, it's talking about, you know, challenges and pushback regarding academic support and also student recruitment. So you got to think, where does student recruitment really start? And that's within high school, right? And you know, obviously all the way throughout public schooling. So it's really important to kind of start there and looking at how Native peoples are regarded and how we are treated, right? And how we factor in to the school to prison pipeline, right? So that's a really important thing to acknowledge in looking at this kind of topic, right? But the fact of the matter is that Native peoples are immediately put at a disadvantage when we enter the public education system. You know, the public education system is designed for, you know, the majority, which is white students, right? If you think about, you know, how schooling really started for Native people in this country, right? How did schooling really start? How did education really start for our peoples? And that's, you know, well, first it started with conversion, right? How, you know, the missionaries and the, you know, kind of first colonizing settlers came here with intentions to kind of convert a lot of the folks, a lot of indigenous peoples who were already here, to Catholicism from our traditional ways of knowing, our spiritualities, our religions, whatever you kind of want to contextualize that as. And then it kind of evolved into boarding schools, right? So a very traumatic experience for our people, which, you know, you have to understand the history and the connections between that kind of education and today's modern education, right? So, you know, we already talked a little bit about it in the last question of like, well, we didn't really hear about indigenous peoples in school, or when we did, it was a very short, you know, time that we spent on focusing on indigenous peoples. And, you know, then it was very generalized, like all indigenous peoples of North America, and not other indigenous peoples were talked about, right? So when we kind of see those rhythms and those patterns within public school, it's discouraging, and it's meant to be, because it's a system, right? It's a system that is very much important to understand how it affects us as indigenous people, right? How we are put in the system, and you know, we are obviously the input as indigenous people. We're put into this system, and the orchestrators of the system, right, those who run the system, expect an output. And I can say right now that is not higher education for our people. That is, you know, not the goal of public education. It's the goal is the school to prison pipeline. It's meant to marginalize us further. It's meant to, you know, kind of put us in those rhythms and patterns, to be further oppressed, further marginalized, and to accept that fate. You know, we see it even in the tiniest of data, like of retention within public school, and then retention and recruitment follows that same kind of pattern within higher education, right? Indigenous students aren't going into higher education at the same rates as, you know, white students. We're not achieving in public education as the same rates as white students. We're not graduating at the same rates as white students, it's because, not because Indigenous people are just dumber than white students, it's because the system is intentional, right? The intention is not for us to go into higher education. So I think it's really important for these conversations to kind of also acknowledge that aspect of things, is like, well, we're not meant in higher education. That's why there's no place for us. That's why we receive this pushback when we seek out academic support, or why we're treated differently within higher education, or why we're not acknowledged as much, you know, in the classroom, or when we are acknowledged, it's singling out, it's stereotyping, it's tokenism, you know, it's all of these different things that, you know, kind of, you know, dehumanize us and kind of boil us down to a cultural figure rather than a human being, right? But we have experiences and experience life beyond, you know, our indigeneity, right? That influences all aspects of our life. But, you know, we're not just Indigenous people, we're also humans, we're also students, we're academics, you know, we're mathematicians, we're engineers, right? So it's you know, very important that we acknowledge that school to prison pipeline, that achievement gap, you know, between Native people, who are traditionally the lowest achieving ethnic group within public education, and, you know, the majority, right, white students, who we see, you know, what history, what perspective is history told through, right? It's never told through Indigenous people's eyes. It's never told through Indigenous people's perspectives. It's always the ship arriving to our shores, you know, never us being on the shores and seeing the ship roll in. You know, so those are just kind of subtle ways that, you know, that we're further marginalized, that we're further, you know, from kind of achieving those goals. And that's just some of the pushback that we receive early on that, you know, translates into that higher education. So I thought I would just touch on that a little bit, but thank you.
Thank you, AJ. You know, what you and Cheyenne had actually spoke about, you know, the pushback, the challenges, it does create this larger question of, you know, why, simply just why, and how. And so we appreciate, you know, both of your inputs. Rayon, would you like to add on to the conversation?
Thank you, AJ, for really getting into, you know, the importance of our historical, you know, or the history of our people when it comes to education. I am so honored. I mean, I'm so grateful for the amazing American Indian program at New Mexico State University, run by Michael Ray, who really stood up for students at our university. And, you know, I got to learn from him a lot about student involvement and student attainment, and getting students to continue throughout the 4 years of their education, or at the very least, or the very most, getting their associate's degree at New Mexico State University. You know, no one wants to go to university to really fail, so important, you know, that the American Indian program at New Mexico State University worked to make a comfortable space for Indigenous students and supporters as well of Indigenous peoples. At New Mexico State University, I really had the opportunity of working in multiple parts of the university. I got to be president of the Native American Business Student Association, to be a student senator for New Mexico State University, representing over about 300 students, and, you know, working with student organizations as well. I got to, in those positions, work in multiple boards at New Mexico State University for student involvement and to bring representation for Native American students. And then I became the first Native American student to run for president of the Associated Students of New Mexico State University, which represents all of the, which represents all the students at New Mexico State University. And that was a bit of, you know, a realization to me that student involvement is very important, that the lack of student participation from Native American students is not great and it's not good. You know, and it's important that more Native American students get involved at their university in different levels and in different aspects. So it can be through student organizations like RISE and through different means of communication as well, or in different organizations as well. And so, you know, one of the biggest things that I had the opportunity to carry at New Mexico State University was Indigenous Peoples Day, and I got to work with, you know, AJ, who helped in that legislation, and I got to work hard with different faculty members at New Mexico State University and different student organizations, getting involvement and support for Indigenous Peoples Day at New Mexico State University. And in that, you know, there was a lot of racist remarks that were made to me, and thankfully it was only to me, it wasn't to any other Indigenous student, but you know, that really spoke levels and volumes to me because they were so inaccurate and misrepresented. You know, when I talked about state flag in the New Mexico state flag and how the symbol, or the Zia symbol, was stolen from our Pueblo community, I was told that that was not true and that was inaccurate. I was told, you know, that the reason why the crime rate is so bad on reservations is because the men on the reservations contribute a lot to that. And then I was told that, you know, the rate of missing and murdered Indigenous women is at that rate because of husbands, Native husbands beating on their wives. And that was absolutely horrifying for me because I got to, I had to go through all those emotions, and you know, I still go through those emotions. But out of that, I hope, and I know actually, that I've educated, at least from my perspective and from my community and tribe, that those are inaccurate and those aren't true. And I was fortunate enough to actually pass Indigenous Peoples Day in 2019 at New Mexico State University, or 2018, I believe, and became one of the first universities in the state of New Mexico to do such. And later that year, Indigenous Peoples Day passed through the New Mexico State Legislature in 2019, and you know, the first celebration for Indigenous Peoples Day was that same 2019. And you know, seeing the results of the hard work that our student and our student organizations and our student involvement really impacted, you know, our state in some way. I did realize that, or I did hear that, you know, one of the reasons, or one of the support for Indigenous peoples came from that Indigenous Peoples Day legislation through New Mexico State University. So, you know, that was a really great opportunity to hear, a great thing to hear, and I was so honored. So student involvement is so important and may not seem as important when you're doing the work, but it could have some huge and amazing opportunities. Yeah, so I'm not sure if I answered that question. Let me just make sure that I did. And yeah, so one of the reasons why I think that there was such pushback for Indigenous Peoples Day at New Mexico State University was because of, like Amari said, they don't know our existence, or they don't recognize our existence. And if they do, it's basically mainly from film and television and literature. And they've never really sat down with us as an Indigenous peoples and heard our stories or heard our history or heard our art. So those misconceptions and that lack of understanding really spoke to their pushback. And it was so funny because speaking on Indigenous Peoples Day, there was only pushback and resistance from our students, but when it came to faculty members, when I passed it with my amazing mentor, Dr. Manal Hamze and Dr. Lara Gutierrez, there was no pushback, there was no hesitation of passing Indigenous Peoples Day through the Faculty Senate, and they were so favor of it that they wanted to close New Mexico State University on that day. But ultimately it was decided that rather than closing it, we teach students on that day about Indigenous cultures and Indigenous issues and the important work that Indigenous communities are doing, not only in their own communities, but in all of our communities across the world. So, thank you.
Oh, Rayanne, you brought up that, and I just wanted to share the UTEP experience trying to get Indigenous Peoples Day, because it was hard. It was just such a mess of, we literally went to the student council just to ask how we would go about trying to get UTEP to do it first. Before we even really had a plan, we didn't want the day off. All we really wanted to do was to try to get UTEP to, more than anything, we wanted it on our calendars. On the student planner, we just wanted it to be underneath Pride Week, underneath, minor whatever. We just want to have it on there saying, Indigenous Peoples Day, to be officially recognized. And the backlash, if Stephanie Paz could talk about it, I don't think she has the permission to talk through, but we were surprised at what we got from the SGA, the Student Government Association, the way they talked. The president was kind of very much against it. And then we did end up doing maybe Stephanie can speak better on it, but it was just such a struggle. I'm not sure. Do you want to talk about it, Stephanie?
Yeah, hi everybody. This is Stephanie Boss. I'm not going to share my camera because we're in our office, but I was a Student Government Association senator at UTEP, and back in 2016, Cheyenne and Arise actually came into the Senate and asked, what can we do for Indigenous Peoples Day here on campus? And luckily the Senate was like, you know what, we do have an Indigenous senator who can help out with that. So I had the opportunity to work with Arise and very closely with Cheyenne and Dr. Shepard, who's also in this meeting right now, to see what we can do and what kind of resolution we could draft for Indigenous Peoples Day. It was awesome being able to work with them, and Cheyenne and Arise being so proactive to have something on campus to honor the indigeneity at UTEP. I know that within the Student Senate, we did have some backlash from the president at the time, and I remember he made a comment that said, I need evidence as to why. I'm not sure if you remember, Cheyenne, but during the Senate meeting, he was like, well, I need evidence to see why we should be able to celebrate this day on campus. And was very reluctant and kind of racist towards us. But we had the resolution, and it shows, a good over 2/3 of the senators had voted yes. One of them abstained. I don't see why. And then, the president ended up signing it, but we did meet a lot of backlash within the Senate as well. And I can't really speak too much about the Faculty Senate. I know that Cheyenne and Dr. Shepard can speak on that experience. But from my understanding, there was also some gripes met with the faculty senate, correct?
Yeah, no, it just got funny because it seemed like we had a lot of support, but then there were people. I remember there was a teacher or two in particular that did bring up that whole. It seemed like it came out of left field of like we should honor our histories, and they were leaning more toward the Columbus Day issue, you know. Kind of like we have to remember that part of it. Why celebrate this part of it? And it was just so awkward and strange. And then it did pass, though. It did pass technically. And it was just this kind of, we had such a relief about it. We thought it meant one thing. But then the following year, when we were trying to do our Indigenous Day celebration, we had on all our flyers, you know, UTEP's first Indigenous Peoples Day celebration. And we got a message from UTEP saying you can't put official. Because on our paperwork, it was more that we were given permission to celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day, not technically, legally, that it was officially recognized. It was such bump-kiss paperwork. It went around, and it was very disappointing because we had over 1,000 signatures from the student body. We had so much support, and maybe now that El Paso's made the effort to change it to Indigenous Peoples Day, something will happen. But you know, it was really heartbreaking when that happened to have that issue, and it still didn't change. You know, and like I said, we weren't asking for the day off. We just wanted it on calendars. We just wanted this small recognition, and it was pulling teeth.
And hopefully we can actually try and do it again this year. If not this year, then next year. Because that's one of our plans, is to get UTEP to officially recognize Indigenous Peoples Day. So hopefully, you know. But thank you, Stephanie Paz. Thank you, Dr. Shepard. And I would also say thank you because she was also part of this tremendous effort to get UTEP to officially recognize Indigenous Peoples Day. And we are very much hopeful that we will one day get them to officially
We might need to ask for some help. We're going to need some advice.
Yeah. We will actually have a much more, I'm hoping that with the current president, that something could be done. But we'll see. We will see. All right, so thank you so much, everyone. We still have Yanni and we still have Ari. If you guys, whoever wants to start.
Hi. I don't have much to add personally for a backlash because I've never experienced it in higher education. I haven't really been involved in like situations that other people have experienced backlash or pushback. But I know that for Arise, like there wasn't that much representation, or like there wasn't that much like from UTEP, they wouldn't promote their events as much, and I didn't hear about them until maybe like the day before or that same day, and I thought that was really surprising, just because like other events, they would promote them like a week before, 2 weeks before, and like I would know about it. No, there was, so in higher education, not that much, like in college, but just like elementary, middle school, there was just some kids that would just say like, oh, like ask, like how Emery was talking before about, they'd be like, oh, do you live in a teepee, or do you send smoke signals, or just ignorant things like that. And I think it's important for those kids to grow up learning about Indigenous issues and like getting the facts straight, you know. But it's all about just educating them and making sure that they get the right education, like the right facts about all Native American, all Indigenous peoples. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Okay, so for me, I'm not in higher education yet. I'm still in high school. But I mean, throughout like my experience throughout the public education system, I've experienced like backlash from teachers. Like I think it was my sophomore year, my theater teacher. He was in a bad mood. I was in a bad mood. It was not like a good day. And I had my phone on the desk, and he started getting mad at me about it. So I right away put it away. And he decides to make a little remark, and he's like, "Oh, you're just gonna end up working at a casino like all these other Tiguas." He's like, "Cause all my former Tigua students work at casinos." And I was like, "Okay, well, no, because you had both my aunts, and they're both very successful. You had one of my cousins, and she's successful as well." I was like, so no, like that's not gonna happen. And then last year too, the first day of school, I can't remember what she told me, but my English teacher, she made a remark too about me being Tigua, and throughout like the whole school year, she would tell me, "Oh, I wish my baby daddy was Tigua. I wish I can get money from you guys the way you guys always get money." And it's like, no, like we can't, like no, that's just already a no. So I've never felt comfortable going to school. Like going to school, it was always weird trying to fit in. You know, majority of the students there are Hispanic, and I'm Hispanic as well. But I grew up more learning like my mom's side of it, like my Tigua side, I guess. So growing up, like it was hard. It was weird. I never felt like I fit in. You know, my friends would always talk in Spanish, and I was just kind of there, like, oh, like, you know, I would just sit there and smile because I like had no clue what they were talking about. They'd always ask me like if I lived in the teepee, if I sent smoke signals, or if my dad was a drunk, because you know natives are known as drunks, and it's like, no, my dad's not even native, so don't come at me with that. But you know, that's why now going into higher education in just a couple of months, that's why my goal is to find a school where I'll be comfortable, where I will have that diversity of Indigenous people. And I think that's why ASU really caught my eye the first time I went. We walked into the American Indian Program building, and like it was just so welcoming. And last May I went for Brenda's graduation, my aunt, and I just felt really comfortable, and that's when I knew right away, okay, like I need to apply here. Like there's no questions, like I'm applying to you. So yeah, like majority of the schools I'm looking at are schools that involve like or have that Indigenous, I guess like that diversity for Indigenous people, and it's welcoming for us. You know, because I've never experienced it, and I really want to. That's something I really want to experience and enforce. So yeah, that's my answer.
Hi, I wanted to add something that I remembered in high school, mostly in high school. But it was really hard to get excused for like ceremonial days, like for like I don't remember which one it was, like what year it was, but I remember I was trying to get excused for a traditional dance that I was gonna be participating in. And they were asking for so many things, and it was just very complicated. And I even had to get one of our councilmen on the phone with my principal, and it was just really hard to be excused for like a ceremonial day. Thank you.
Thank you both, and I do wish you know, Amory, to for you to get accepted into that school. You know, that it's sounds so amazing. So early congrats, advance, and we hope.
Thank you.
And thank you, Vianney, for sharing your input as well. I think we have time for maybe one more question, if that's still okay. Is it? I guess no. I guess the other moderators are like, they're okay, they're cool. All right, so we want to actually give it up to Laura, who could pick the last question. Panelists.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. So next question is, how do you feel about the for Indigenous students when it comes to education? What are the options you see for students to grow as individuals and as a nation?
Can you repeat that? It came out a little choppy.
How do you feel for Indigenous students when it comes to education? What are the options you see to grow up as individuals and as
I can start. I'm hopeful. Hopeful. I want to be hopeful. You know, I think it's much more good for my own mental health to hope for the best in the future, that things are leaning toward being better. You know, I think I hate bringing the real world into it, but like depending on how some politics are going, how things shift and change within the next year or two, that might actually make a lot of an effect on these things. The floating ideas around in politics, like they're bleeding into our everyday lives, and they're bleeding into education too, you know. So I think I've been seeing slow progression into schools thinking about these things, individuals thinking, you know, we want to help change and help Indigenous students and Indigenous people having much more of a pride and effort in themselves to see, as AJ mentioned, kind of breaking that idea that, you know, education isn't for me. You know, that was very prevalent for a lot of people, and you're starting to see that fight and that backlash and that break of like, no, I can be there too. I can be the next, you know, lawyer. I can be the next president. You know, that thinking is changing, and that slow progression to a much more thing. It makes me hopeful, and I want to be hopeful, and so that. You know, I think if it keeps going in the right way, if people keep supporting change in the right way, if we keep in mind supporting people that those support those changes as well, I think that it should be good. Hopefully. Any other thoughts, y'all?
Thank you so much, Cheyenne. Let's change it up a bit and start with the girls, with Armory or Vianney, whoever wants to go first. Sorry for putting you on the spot.
Okay, I'll go first. I just think we have to change the mindset of ourselves as Indigenous people and say that like we can do this. Like, don't put pressure on ourselves that no, like this isn't, like society is putting pressure on ourselves that we have to stay where we are, and we have to like be what we're like stereotypical, and changing the mindset of like other people, like to see us as more than like working at the casino, or like see us more than like the stereotypical jobs that Indigenous people have, and yeah, just to break that stereotype. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Armory, if you're good to go, or
Okay, yeah. So, I'm reading the question right away. I think it's more pushing ourselves as like an Indigenous student, and not giving up so fast. What else? You know, I feel that we can have a really good future for Indigenous students if we start with ourselves. It starts here with us, and you know, I think going more towards the youth as well, because they are the next generation. You know, they are the future. And they're what's gonna they are the ones that are gonna help us grow as people and as a nation and as people, you know, getting us out there. And I think, I don't know, I feel like not giving up. I already said that. I think a lot of people, a lot of Indigenous, they graduate high school. They right away think my easy way out of it is to go work at the casino because I don't have money for college, or I don't have that support from my family. And thankfully I have that support here with my family and with my mentors. And my mom always tells me, you're not going to give up when you graduate. You're going to college. Like, I don't care what you say. Like, it's not a no for me. No, I think that's all I have to say.
I think what you've said is perfect. It's good. It's really, really good. How about, we are running a little bit out of time. Let's switch it over with the guys, with Rayon or with AJ, whoever wants to start. I think we scared him.
Okay. All right. I think AJ gave me the green light. So education, comes in very different ways, and I think the most, education comes in different ways for master's degree, law degree, associate's degree, technical trade, IT. But I really hope and relay to all of you. The teachings of our traditional cultures and which as Indigenous peoples is most important. A lot of our Indigenous communities are facing the deterioration or lack of support or lack of care for our traditional teachings. And it's most important for us to carry on that traditional heritage for generations, because they have so much wealth of knowledge, from our songs to our prayers to how we interact with the public or how we interact with our family. It's really all so important. And I have the great opportunity, though, in my current position, working as a community support coordinator for the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, helping 10 northern counties across the state of New Mexico and the northern region, helping with federal funding for students to get access to education that'll have an impact in the workforce and for them to get good jobs in their communities. Creating jobs in their communities so that they're able to not leave their hometown, going to bigger cities or bigger communities to get an education, having to spend lots of money. That if they want to, they can learn in their own community and stay within the community and find a job in their community. And that's very important. My time as vice chair of the Native American Democratic Caucus of New Mexico, I was able to really impart the lesson of voter education. It's important for Indigenous communities to vote, because if you care about education and if you care about funding for education, it's important to get out and vote for people who will support you when it comes to educational funding, like the WIOA program. I do have a lot of hope for our Native communities to further their education, again, whether it be in their traditional culture and language, or whether it be in higher education or technical trade education. I do have a lot of hope for that, and I hope our Indigenous students see themselves as important and are willing and able enough to further it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And AJ?
Yeah, thank you guys so much. Those were all really awesome responses, and it's definitely going to be really hard to follow. Yeah, I think, kind of ringing to the same tone as everyone else, I am hopeful for the future of Indigenous education. Like Rayon said, you know, I think that we should put a lot more attention and time into our traditional ways of knowing, you know, because those have always been the ways that prevail. You know, we as Indigenous people have known for a really long time the truths of kind of this world, you know, and in our creation stories, a lot of those truths came from Creator, you know, like we learned from Creator, we learned from the land, we learned from our relatives, you know, all the way from, you know, bodies of water and rocks and, you know, plant life to animals, right? And I think today's Western, you know, kind of epistemology and mindset and views and philosophies are shifting and changing to, you know, what Indigenous people have known for thousands of years, right? Western science, you know, is making a lot of new discoveries that Indigenous people are kind of like, yeah, we've known for a long time, you know, as stewards of this land, as, you know, caretakers of the land, as a part of the land itself, right? So I think it's really important to acknowledge that we have known, right? And that we need to, you know, kind of, you know, remain fluid and remain, you know, able to adjust to the changes of this kind of forever changing world, as, you know, we've probably learned a lot of in this 2020 year of 2020. But at the same time, we need to acknowledge our roots. We need to acknowledge our knowledge as Native people, you know, our traditional ways of knowing, because our ancestors knew about, you know, how to take care of this land, you know, and how to live off of this land and how to live in communion with the land. You know, as far as Indigenous people in, you know, kind of formal Western education, I do have a lot of hope for Western education as well, you know. Like it was mentioned, you know, there's kind of this shift in narrative, right, that we have surrounding ourselves as Indigenous people and the way that we kind of are viewing ourselves. We're rupturing a lot of, you know, the stereotypes that oppressors want us to see ourselves as, right? It's not, you know, like our fault that, you know, we kind of have these preconceived notions about ourselves, right? Or our own success, right? Or that we give in to that imposter syndrome, like, oh, I don't belong here in higher education, or oh, I don't belong here on the graduation stage. No, we as Indigenous people deserve and belong to stand in those spaces, because those spaces are on our land, you know? We are in the land of our inheritance. So we deserve to be in those spaces, you know, we deserve to be a part of those conversations. And that shift in narrative is happening more and more as we see, you know, we're at war with, you know, those preconceived notions of other people and of ourselves about Indigenous people, right? So as we continue to shift that narrative, it's there where we're going to find progression and success, you know, at least progression and success in you know, a more Western definition. But I also think that it's important to, you know, just as we determine our own identities, as we have this sovereignty and self-determination, you know, that we've inherited, it's also important to create our own definition of what success, you know, for us as Indigenous people. Is it, you know, leaving our reservations, leaving our homelands, going to college, becoming a businessman, getting lots of, you know, money and building a life for ourselves? Or is it, you know, improving our conditions as a community, as a people? You know, because European worldview is very singular. It's one, it's me, one truth, one God, one linear experience of myself. But Indigenous worldview, Indigenous epistemology is very cyclical, right? It's circular, it's community, it's, you know, a network of relation, right? You know, we have in all of our different languages, we are all related, right? we are all related to the land. We're all related to these different nations, that we call the four-legged nation and the winged nation. And, we are all in relation with creation. That's something that I like to say is like, as, children of this creation, we share that, kind of brotherhood, that sisterhood, that siblinghood with all of the other children of this creation, right? We fall under this one creation. So true success, as we define it, should be improving our conditions as a people, right? Maybe going and dismantling those systems so that way we can rebuild them, to serve us, to better serve us as a people, to serve everyone who, we now are sharing the land with. How do we, dismantle the systems that oppress us and rebuild them to uplift us, right? How do we go out off of the reservation and weaponize Western education? How do we weaponize that system against oppressors and bring the knowledge that we have from the, outside of our traditional homelands and bring it back to our reservation to start, or bring it back not only to our reservations but our traditional homelands to start, new forms of education, to improve those conditions, to bring resources in. It's not about leaving and being successful and, going on to higher education and, having that kind of hope, but it's about returning back home, and I think that's a really important thing to acknowledge, is that, we can't forget our place in this world, and it's as a relative, right? We always have to be a good relative to those around us, and, not just other people, but the environment that we're a part of, the creation that we're a part of. We are relative to that, right? We are a part of that. We're not separate. And that's, what European worldview kind of brings in, is that separateness of humans and then everything else, the land, the animals, the environment, right? But we need to see ourselves again in a more cyclical way, in a more relational way, as a part of our environment. We are the land defending itself. We are the water defending itself. We are indigenous peoples defending ourselves against that oppression, against that colonization. So that is kind of where I have hope, is within that self-determination, within that sovereignty that we build for ourselves, that our ancestors have laid the foundation for, and that we continue to carry on their legacy. So yeah, I hope I answered that question correctly.
Dude, I needed that speech like my high school year graduating. Which is part of it. Like, my freshman year in college would have been a whole lot less painful if I'd heard things like that, man. Seriously.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for everyone who spoke about their truths, and it's giving us, with Arise, more food for thought as far as like what direction we still need to go, how much we still need to do, and with everyone doing what they can, as students, as and Cheyenne's crying, so yeah. And we appreciate, everybody. And should we continue with the next question, or should we go ahead and open it up to the audience?
I say open it up to the audience, and then we could wrap up with another question if possible.
Right. And so Maria had mentioned who are the faculty liaisons or mentors available for Indigenous students at UTEP. Also, how can resources be made easily available to students and the community?
I'll be honest, there's no one in particular at UTEP as far as I know. I literally had to do things like, I went to UNM for my first 2 semesters of college, and it was actually through seeing their system and getting their help that when I went to UTEP I knew what to do. So I'd put a small answer of like, UTEP might not have someone, but finding Likewise, individuals like at NMSU or other universities, they're really nice. Sometimes those programs, even if you're not in their program, they'll give you help and guidance when it comes to maybe scholarship issues, counseling, things like that. If not that, there is a rise. You know, we wanted to try to be this place for students to kind of have like a place to talk about these kinds of issues and discuss them. But when it comes to more of the hardcore paperwork stuff with universities, UTEP's behind, honestly. You really have to kind of maybe get the help somewhere else and then bring it to UTEP, sadly.
Okay, thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions, concerns they would like to ask the panelists? I believe everyone's microphones is open. For any comments, questions, concerns? I guess with one question that I do have is moving forward, what can we do at a university level, at an EPCC level, and even as a UTEP community, what can we do moving forward and making it more, I guess, easily accessible to break down all of that stereotypes, to break down and to rewrite that narrative? What can we do moving forward?
I'm in the camp that an open mind means a lot. You know, I thought it was interesting. I was talking with one of our members, Bibu. She's one of the new members of Arise. She's actually an executive member. And she's an international student from Nepal. And she had a wonderful thought. I wrote it down because I thought it was real nice, where she had attended an Arise event where someone did prayer. And, you know, even though the lived experiences are so different, she felt very unfathomably bonded at that moment. And I really like that. I think approaching the differences between people in a way where it's like you feel bonded rather than separated means a lot. So to kind of combat issues, just keeping an open mind, instead of seeing differences between people, instead of seeing, you know, I mean, of course everyone has their limit, you know, but if it's something that you can agree is maybe still beautiful but in a different way, you know, changing that mindset first is, I think, very much like a step in the right direction on a personal level. You know, on an activist kind of way, it's like supporting change where you know it needs to be changed. So, you know, giving your support in that direction is what's going to lead to like consistent and solid, long-lasting changes, I think. Much more in my, you know, instead of it being exclusionary, instead of being hateful, instead of supporting things that separate, you know, El Paso is this very beautifully diverse area, and instead of seeing it as a mess of different cultures, you know, instead of falling into that camp of, oh, it's a blended community, it's like, no, it's a mix where everyone's varying amounts of differentness is what makes it wonderful. That's something that should be supported in not just El Paso and not just your individual cities, not just your individual communities, but like everywhere. And I think going toward that mindset is what we should be working on, you know, in supporting, I guess.
I just kind of wanted to piggyback off of that response, because it raised something that I talk about a lot, and it's like, you know, a lot of people think that the United States is the melting pot, right? So it's like a melting pot of different cultures, like you come and then, but it also, the melting pot model kind of makes way for assimilation, right? And so, and another concept that I've heard a lot about is like those at the bottom of the pot get burned. But a model that we should be moving more towards, you know, within, you know, our communities and our states and our nation as a whole is something that I've heard about, which is called the fruit basket model. So it's kind of like, okay, not every differentiation based on identity is bad. That's what makes us unique. That's what makes us individuals. That's what makes our cultures, you know, unique and individual, right? But it's like the pear can live right next to the pineapple and it's fine, right? It's kind of like we're all a part of this fruit basket, you know, and there's not like this assimilation or this, you know, kind of inherent concept that it's like any differentiation based on identity is bad. You know, that kind of follows the idea of like color blindness, like I don't see color, right? But that's important to acknowledge. But kind of going back more to the question that was posed is, you know, I think that anybody who works within, you know, education has an inherent responsibility to educate themselves, oneself, right? Education is of the utmost importance, and you know, there is definitely, I think, an elitist thing among a lot of folks in education, you know, like professors who are teaching classes, right? Because we kind of have this hierarchy in the classroom, right? It's true. It's like there's a teacher and then there's all the students, right? And the teacher is the ultimate wealth of knowledge and the students are all there to learn. But, you know, if going back to like our indigenous ways of knowing, we know that, you know, we are transgenerational learners, right? You know, we learn from babies and we learn from elders. We learn from, you know, all age ranges and all different, because we all have those individual experiences, right? So I think it's important to, you know, to listen, right? And to have a lot, like Cheyenne said, you know, an open mindset, and open ears and open hearts to receive feedback, to receive education from others, right? You know, professors should be learning just as much from their students as we're learning from them. That's so important, and it's not above and beyond, you know, to do those things. It's not anything special to kind of include indigenous people or educate yourself on, you know, systemic and institutional racism and racism within, you know, these higher education, you know, companies, really, right? Because we are essentially, you know, clients of these companies, universities, you know, we're paying product, right? It's not above and beyond to educate yourself on those systems and stuff. It's kind of bare minimum. When I was in Denver Public Schools, I'm originally from Denver, Colorado. I was a part of a group called the Young African American and Latino Leaders, or YAL for short. And we did these equity boot camps, is what we called them. And we would talk about microaggressions and different things within the classroom that make it uncomfortable or put BIPOC students, Black, Indigenous, people of color students at inherent disadvantages within, you know, this kind of larger system. And at the beginning, we would kind of, we at first talked about like, okay, we are talking to these educators who, you know, are kind of very, you know, they've been trained by that hierarchy. We're the educators, these are the students. It's our job to educate these students, to pass on knowledge to them, which it is, but that kind of makes it very closed off to taking in those lessons from students, right? So how do we kind of break down that wall right away? And so we have, you know, a room full of 300 educators, all the way from, you know, teachers within classrooms to principals to deans, we would have them all stand up and we'd have a list of microaggressions that would happen within the classroom, right? If you've ever told a student that your classroom was an English speaking only zone, right? Or different stuff, you know, that microaggressions and kind of implicit biases and racisms that teachers would endorse within the classroom. And we'd be like, please sit down if you have ever endorsed this, or if you've ever done this, or if you've ever allowed this to happen within your classroom. And by the time we got through all of these different microaggressions, there would be, out of a room of 300, 400, 500 sometimes educators, no more than 5 ever educators still standing. And I mean, we had a list of maybe 15 microaggressions, 15 to 20. And we would tell these educators, this is the bare minimum that you are required, you know, to not endorse microaggressions, to not let this implicit racism by within your classrooms. You know, need to educate yourself to make, you know, to make changes within the system, to make changes within your classroom. So that way we can further dismantle that school to prison pipeline. So that's what I would say above anything. Like, education is key for everybody within a university setting, for everybody within a high school, middle school, you know, grade school setting. It's not just the students who should be there to learn, who should come prepared to learn, but it's educators and administrators and staff and faculty who should come prepared to learn from students just as much as we learn from them. So that's what I would say in response to that.
And all I will say, AJ, is continue on preaching, because you are awesome. What you've said is absolutely true. And I do want to give it up for Vianney and for Emery, if you guys want to comment on that as well. It could be that everybody's already tuning out, considering it's already past 1:30. Right, so Vianney's she is having technology issues.
Okay, I can go. So kind of what AJ went based off of like educators being there to learn from their students as well. That's something I agree on, like that's on, you know, last year I had a history teacher and he was the best teacher I've ever had. Like, he was so welcoming. You know, he found out I was Native American, and I would, like, every single day before class started, I would stand outside his classroom door and we would discuss like different issues that were going on in Indian country. You know, and I think that's something a lot of educators should start doing, because it's not, they should start doing that because it makes the students feel welcome and comfortable with them. And, you know, it makes a student excited to go to that class because you have an educator there that's willing to listen to you and just talk to you about everything and willing to learn things. So yeah, because I've had teachers as well that, I mean, they really don't care about what we have to say. So that's all I have to say on that.
Thank you so much, Emery. We do have a very brief comments from Mauricio. Hopefully, I like to take this word. I heard from Cheyenne to express what it inspires the space to me. The level of organization of the indigenous I can see you have there is an important experience to take, like a model to develop here in the communities of Argentina. I hope to be able to meet some experience. In some cases, we are here so far away of reaching some rights you've already got. Congratulations for that. I think that the economic and social vulnerability of our societies in general, and indigenous particularly, makes it harder. But see this kind of experiences makes us see that big changes, big things can be done. Thank you so much, and thank you, Mauricio, for commenting on that. We appreciate it. So Vianney seems to be back. Would you like to say anything?
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear.
Yes? Okay. Sorry, my internet cut out for a bit. Can you see me or
Not at the moment.
no?
Can hear you though, Vianney. You can answer if you like.
Okay. I'm sorry, I got distracted. What was the question?
It was what we can do in moving forward as far as the community, El Paso community, and trying to bridge what we need to bridge between the community and indigenous people. It could be something that is going on with high schools. It could be something that is going on at a higher education or anything else in the community.
I think the first good step in doing that was El Paso making Indigenous Peoples Day like a official holiday for El Paso. And probably another thing would be taking down the statues of like Juan Onate in the airport, because it's just not appropriate just to have like someone that was a murderer displayed in El Paso, you know what I mean? Some people that are for it are like, oh, it's a part of our history and it's how we got here. But they don't take into consideration how we feel about it and how we, as Indigenous people, we don't see him as somebody to idolize. We see him as somebody that shouldn't be, that shouldn't have a statue at all, for that matter. But that would probably be a good starter, is to take down all his statues and just to bring awareness of how that affects us emotionally and just like the trauma that comes with it. But yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. And I do remember how there was this special that went on in ABC News, or I think it was some other news network, that talked about how people believe in the benefits of colonization, that they don't see the wrongness of the statues. And that's something that's very serious that we need to further discuss on and to hopefully start acting on removing these statues. So thank you so much for bringing that up.
Thank you.
And I think, does anyone have any questions, any more questions, concerns? And this is leaving it up to the audience. Yeah, I guess not, or if somebody wants to talk.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, my name is Julieta, and I joined the conversation a bit late. I was really interested in hearing, I never thought, like I said, I joined this, but I didn't know that we had, like, I guess, a Native community here in El Paso, and I definitely didn't know about the statue at the airport. I moved here from Phoenix, and I'm fairly new here in the community as well. So hearing all of these things, is kind of a shocker for me to understand, like come to grips with. Because in Phoenix, I'm a minority in Phoenix. I experienced, a lot of, that systemic racism, but I never really thought it until you guys mentioned like all these microaggressions and all that stuff. To me, that was the norm. But now that I'm here in El Paso and that this new community going on, I guess like where can I find like these resources to get like reliable resources so that I can know more about this community and Native people and like the history in El Paso, because I remember also reading here like University at 1301 how there was like the gasoline like showers of immigrant workers and like the burning, and I didn't even think racism like the way that they describe it in what's it called in the South, like with the Jim Crow laws was here in El Paso. So to me that was really shocking. Yeah, so again, like, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Like again, sorry, I just like who could I contact or who can I like get in touch, or like what resources or books do you guys recommend so that I can get more acquainted with what you guys talked about.
Yadira, you want to answer that?
And if you're also here at UTEP, we also have ARISE. We're the Academic Revival of Indigenous Studies and Education. We are the student organization that bridges everything, regarding Indigenous cultures, their histories, current events, and we try to bring it to the UTEP community.
You said it was RISE, right?
ARISE, yes, it's the Academic Revival of Indigenous Studies and Education. I can put that in the chat.
Thank you.
All right, so thank you, everyone. Does everyone have any other questions, comments, concerns? All right, so I guess we can probably safely close our discussion panel. I do want to thank all of our wonderful panelists for contributing, for participating. We appreciate you. Everyone is just absolutely wonderful and awesome. And we do have one prayer to leave with the discussion.